Hi, I'm Andrew Luce, and this is my experimental study of instrumental teaching methods. So a little bit of background about myself. I am a junior music education and trumpet performance major at Slippery Rock University. So this is something that I've been really interested in. It's actually a project for my instrumental methods class, which is a class that we study how do we teach instruments using what methods, what books, all that kind of stuff. So this is something that I've been studying a little bit and working through. The reason I'm interested in this kind of study is because I've taken lessons from a lot of different teachers, a lot of different professors in many different settings. So I've kind of seen a lot of different things that I've kind of like to find out what's the best thing for students and what works and what doesn't. And I'd also like to go on to grad school, be a professor myself, and have a studio. So I'd like to know what works for me as a teacher and what kind of different things I can see about my students to be the best teacher that I can. So the things I'm trying to figure out most about this study is what's the most effective method for teaching students. I really want to know what works the best and in what kind of context. I'd also like to make connections between the different learning styles, which we'll talk about in a minute, and teaching styles. So if I have a student that acts a certain way or learns a certain way, I can kind of change my teaching to best suit them, which is, as a teacher, what we really want to do. I'd also like to consider making this a larger study and do some more research about the teaching methods and apply them to some actual situations. As you'll see later, my students aren't exactly middle school instrumental students, so it's a little bit of a different situation and it doesn't quite work exactly the way I'd like, but it's still the same idea. I'd also like to improve my personal teaching concepts. I'd like to be able to know more things about when I'm teaching students. When I'm out in the field, I want to have more tricks in my bag so that I can pull something out and say, hey, remember that time I did that study? Well, this is what works in this situation. And I can kind of pull things out and work things as they go. And just in general, I'd like to have more knowledge about pedagogy and teaching, and so that I can continue to impart my wisdom upon others, especially students. So whenever we do an experiment or a theory, got to use a scientific method. This is the groundwork for all experiments, studies, anything, whether it be chemistry or psychology. So I use this to kind of work through things, and we'll talk about each method as we go, and starting with asking a question. At the beginning, you always have to ask a question about what do you want to know. And so for me, I wanted to know how different teaching methods affect individual instrumental learning and which methods are the most effective. So mostly the second half of this, what works the best and in what situations. So essentially it's the what, where, when, how, and why of teaching methods in instrumental settings. So we did a little bit of research beforehand. This is part of the experimental process. You have to know about the information that you're looking up. You can't just do an experiment and then not know what it means. So I looked up a couple of the teaching methods and learning methods and what some of our psychologists have said about education. The first one is Gardner, and he did the multiple intelligences. Essentially, he said that there's 8 different types of learning, and each student has a kind of a combination of multiple. And so we have to, as teachers, find out what these methods are and cater to them so that the students can learn in the most effective process possible. So these are the 4 that are mostly concerned in music: the linguistic, so the talking, responding to conversation; spatial, which is essentially movement, body. Spatial is visual, bodily is kinesthetic ideas, and the musical, which of course all musicians should probably be musical learners. Then we have the Bandura social learning theory. This theory is pretty much where our concepts of modeling comes from. We find that students, and children especially, learn most from watching and seeing, especially with their parents, seeing what they do and repeating those actions to learn new things. And this process comes from this little four-part idea of attention. So the student's paying attention to the teacher or parent, seeing what they're doing. They're retaining the information. They're not only seeing it, but they're also understanding it, comprehending it, knowing what's going on, then being able to reproduce it. So they can do the action as well, and not just one time. They're able to continually do it and have the motivation to do so. So what does this accomplish? What does this get me? And that's their motivation to continue the reproduction of the thing that they retained when they were paying attention. Then we have the Barb and Swassing learning modalities. And these are very common, and a lot of people know about them, and I'm sure you know which learning method works best for you, but young students don't always. So we have to figure out if they're visual learners, what they see, auditory, what they hear, or kinesthetic, what they do. So we have to kind of figure out what method works best for our students and implement that into our classroom. If we can get all of them, perfect. If not, we need to make sure that we're hitting the ones that our students are. So then we talk about the design of the experiment. So this experiment includes 6 different individuals, all willing participants that decided to join in and participate in my survey experiment thing. And so I separated them randomly into 3 different groups. So we have the teaching using a combination of verbal and modeling. So we have both methods, and this is what we hope to have in the classroom. Diverse learning setting, being able to accomplish both sides of teaching. And so this is what we're going for. This is kind of the normal case. But then we also have teaching using only modeling. And so this is a method that could be used in some settings. I know there is some usage of it. And so we determined that there's not much talking, not much verbal instruction, mostly just repeating after me and watching the teacher to see what they're doing. We also have teaching using only verbal instruction, which is no modeling at all, and mostly just talking. Unfortunately, this tends to be the case in some high school, middle school band settings, because the band directors are no longer competent on their own instrument, don't know other instruments, can't model certain things for those students, and it becomes an only verbal affair. So that's another method that we go to. And so this video here that we have, I'm going to show you how I separated the groups. There's 3 different groups and 6 students total, so we have to find a way to put them up. So here's that video.
Okay, so I've had everyone sign up for my experiment so that we're all good to go with participation. Now I just need to put them into groups. So I'm going to do this randomly by assigning a code to each of the participants. And the code is first a number, their grade, so freshman through senior, 1 through 4, and then the abbreviation for their instrument. So flute would be FL. And so here's my list of participants. I had to write it backwards so that you can see it in the camera. And so now I'm going to put them into groups, group 1, group 2, group 3, using these cards. So I'm going to mix them up randomly. If I draw an ace, they'll be group 1, king, group 2, and queen, group 3. So we're going to start out with 4CL is the first participant. And they will be ace. So that'll be group number 1. Write that down. So now we have participant 2.5 TP. And they will be in group 3. Write that down.
So the great part about this process is it allows for the selection process to be completely random. I don't have any say in what person is in what group. And it also allows the students to have some, they're going to be anonymous, which is not necessarily a big deal, but they don't have to worry that people are going to know how they score or what have you. So, going more with the experiment, the students will have 3 5-minute lessons. This will be over the course of a period of time, so it's not just like 3 lessons in a row or anything. And the students will be assessed based on a 20-point scale. Now there's a rubric. I know you want to see the rubric. I love the rubric. But I'll show you that a little bit later and show you how those 20 points are divvied up. So we always have to have an hypothesis in an experiment. What do I think is going to happen here? So I think personally blended learning is going to yield the best results. I think using both methods is probably the best way to go. And so I'm thinking both together will be the best. And then I thought, I think modeling will be the next best approach. It allows students to explore on their instruments a little bit more, to hear what's going on, and really be able to emulate the teacher who will hopefully be using good technique. And I feel like in the verbal instruction, students might get bored without hearing too much instruction. They might start phasing things out, not really paying attention. So I think the verbal instruction will yield moderate, maybe poor results, in my hypothesis. So the very first thing I did was a diagnostic interview. Now this interview essentially lets me know what the students already know about the trumpet and music in general. There's an 8-question survey, and the questions are: what do you know about the trumpet? Can you play any simple songs? Can you play any of your scales? What type of learner are you in terms of visual, auditory, or kinesthetic? How much trumpet training do you have? Label each part of the trumpet. How much musical training do you have outside of trumpet? And how many articulations do you know? So these questions allow me to get all kinds of different information. I get to know their basic background information, background knowledge about the instrument. I get to know what they can already do on the instrument, how they learn, going back to the Barb and Swassing learning modalities. How much trumpet training they have. You never know. They might have taken a class or taken some lessons over the summer. Labeling the parts of the trumpet, that goes with their trumpet IQ, which I'll talk about a little bit later. It's something I came up with. How much other music training they have. So if they played flute or bass or whatever, they can apply that to the trumpet in terms of dynamics, phrasing, musicality, that I can kind of gauge based on what else they've been doing. And also, what articulations do they know? Essentially, just kind of trumpet-specific things that I want to learn. So here is our first student in our very first diagnostic interview. Alright. What type of learner are you in terms of visual, auditory, or kinesthetic?
I feel like I'm probably more of a... I don't actually know. Maybe a visual learner.
So he's saying he's a visual learner. A little hard to read.
How much trumpet training do you have?
None. I have brass methods.
Okay.
A third of brass methods.
Can you label each part of the trumpet?
Yeah. Bell. Mouthpiece. Lead pipe. You got the valves, the valve casings. The third valve slide. Tuning slide. Spit valve or water hole. I think this is a pinky ring. I don't know what that is. This is the first valve slide. That's it.
Alright.
So here's our second student.
Can you play any simple songs on the trumpet?
I think so.
Good. Can you play any scale?
I can play the concert B flat with a C scale on the trumpet. Oh, maybe not.
Okay, good.
Here's a third student.
So, what can you tell me about the trumpet?
The trumpet is a brass instrument,
Alright.
and it uses valves, sometimes rotary if you want to be fancy. You buzz into it to play it. It is conical.
Okay.
It is usually pitched in B flat. It has slides to tune.
Usually.
Usually. It's made of brass.
All right, and our fourth and final student
And how much trumpet training do you
in this particular
Zero.
slide.
0. Okay. How much musical training do you have? Aside from the trumpet.
Lots. Vocal training.
Okay.
So as you can see here, you have a lot of different levels of students. You have some students that have very little trumpet training. You have some that can pretty much play a C major scale. So we have a large diversity of students and different levels. So it's really nice for the survey to kind of have different kind of students. So the next thing we do is have a first lesson. This is where we can best assess their ability level. You know, they can play a scale great, but you got to be able to read the music and play it. So here's where we really assess their playing ability. And just based on their diagnostic, I kind of assigned them a piece. I gave each one a different piece based on their ability level, giving them something that they can kind of take and really sink their teeth in. Now I gave them more challenging music than easy music. I didn't really want to baby any of the students. I feel like continuing to push things forward is the best way. So they will continue to play this piece throughout all 3 lessons, and so they'll continue to grow in this one particular thing. And so all the observations made in our original diagnostic interview and this lesson will factor into the pre-lesson score. Now, I wanted to have the first lesson as part of the pre-lesson score just because it gives me a better chance to really assess some of the categories, and we'll see those in a minute when we get to the rubric. But we're going to show a couple first lessons. So here we have a first lesson, and this is a blended category lesson.
The math piece out. We're going to start with some easy puzzle. Okay, so the first thing you're going to want to do is, you ever go home after a long time in school and your mom makes your favorite meal and you say,
Yeah.
Can you go ahead and make that for me?
Mm.
Good. So we want to, when we say we want to put our mouthpiece right in the middle of our mouth. Say Good.
Mm.
And that's the embouchure that we want to have. So when we release our air, just a little stream of air, we want to articulate. Do you know what articulation is? Okay. So we want to put the tongue right on the top, or the bottom of the top teeth, or actually the top of your top teeth, right where the gum meets the teeth. And go ahead and release our air with that tongue. Can you try that? Good. But we want to make sure we remember our
So clearly she has much to learn. This next lesson here is a verbal only lesson. This is his first lesson. This piece is, I think, Austrian hymn, national anthem or something. Enjoy.
I don't really know a lot of these ones.
Okay, so the main thing we want to remember is A is 1 and 2, and B is just seconds.
Okay.
And F sharp is also 2.
I don't know the fingering for E.
Okay, so E is open, and it's a little bit, it's the same partial, or it's the same fingering as C, so you want to make sure that you're making you have good air, and that your corners are firm when you play the high notes.
And we will continue to see him grow over the course of the presentation. So here's our rubric, as promised. And we have 5 categories of levels. So we have superior, which is pretty much, you know what you're doing. You got the trumpet, you can play it. Everything seems pretty good, consistent of a really excellent young student for this particular survey. Then we have the advanced category, This is, you're doing really well. Maybe one or two small things aren't quite there, but mostly really solid. Then we have the acceptable category, which is, yeah, you're doing all right. You know, things are going well. You're learning, you're progressing, you know. But maybe there's some things you don't quite know yet, and some things that you really need to learn to get going in the right direction. Then we have the needs improvement category. This is usually like 2 or 3 big things that you just can't do without. You really need to improve. And so that category is for those students. Then deficient is you really don't know anything. Like you don't know where the mouthpiece goes, you don't know what a trumpet is, you don't know how to articulate, or you don't know what sounds is happening. This is really not knowing. And then we have 4 categories of things to assess. So we have the embouchure, which is everything about the face. You know, where the mouthpiece is placed, how firm the corners are you setting everything else up the right way? This is all about the face, and that's worth a total 5 points. Then we have tone production, which is everything to do with sound. So what kind of sound is coming out of your instrument? Is it clear? Is it right? Is it supported well? Is it air supported? Are you taking big breaths? Everything that has to do with the sound. So that's the tone production. That's also worth 5. Then a smaller category is the articulation category. This is essentially, do you know staccato, legato, slurred articulation? And these are some things that we will talk about in our lesson. But this is just a smaller category. Then we have the big category, something that I call trumpet IQ. I talked about it a little bit earlier. This is essentially knowing trumpet, not just, you know, can you make a good sound, but really understanding the principles of the trumpet. So, can you name all the parts? Can you hold the instrument properly? Can you play all of the notes in a C major scale? Do you know the fingerings? And the fingerings for all your notes. And as you have seen and will see, that maybe they don't always know their fingerings all the time. But that's something that is really important when it comes to teaching. Next, I'm going to show you the pre-lesson scores here, based on these 4 categories. And here's the total. As I can see, we have a wide range of students between 0 to 20. 20 is the highest score. Then we've got a 3. This is clearly someone who has a lot to learn still. We also have an 18. This is someone that really knows what they're doing. They have a good start already, and they're well on the way. So, we got the diagnostic first lesson done. We have their scores after those. Now we move on to the second lesson. So, our second and third lesson are going to be used to assess their learning and to see their improvement. So we're going to use that pre-assessment as a baseline to see what they've got going on. So we got I have 2 clips for each, the second and third lesson. Can't show you everything, it would take just way too long. So here we have a student who is in a verbal only environment.
So now I want you to bring the entire thing down. So what kind of things are you going to have to think about if we're doing it?
Smaller airstream.
Smaller airstream? Okay, but more specifically, how are we going to be successful with these lower notes at all?
Still play them formally, but a little bit softly.
Good. So I want you to think about keeping an airstream down, keeping it moving at all times, and even though you're going to be quietly, I want you to have an inefficient airstream, which means I want you to have a lot of air, but just very quiet. Okay, good. How do you feel about that?
It was a little sloppy for the larger intervals, but it was better than before we started.
Okay, good.
So with the verbal lessons, I chose to use a lot of Socratic techniques, asking them questions. How do they feel about it? What do they think? What kind of things can you do to improve? And this also allows the students to have a whole bunch of self-assessment, which, in my personal opinion, is one of the best kinds of assessment, because students know when they're playing well and they know when they're not, and so harnessing and fostering that self-awareness really helps students with personal practice in the future, being able to identify and fix problems in their own playing and continue to move that forward. So our second lesson here is a modeling only lesson. So there's not going to be a whole lot of auditory clues here. So yeah.
That's why it starts to get too high for me.
Okay, that's good. All right, so we're gonna do some cone response kind of stuff, kind of like we did last week, and so we're just gonna play. We're gonna start in the second one.
Okay.
Where you're having trouble. Good. On screen. You can do it with both hands.
Okay.
Good.
So with the modeling form of teaching, I'm not just only playing, I'm also, showing a lot with my hands and showing direction and breathing and all that kind of things. All those things with my hands as well, so that the student can really see the direction of things. So that I can use my hands to kind of show them, well, this is what I'm trying to get you to see. I'm trying to get you to breathe more, but using that air and flowing and all that kind of stuff can also be done with the hands. Then we move on to the third lesson. And here we saw him earlier. We have a verbal only lesson in his third lesson.
Good. That's good. Okay, so when you're thinking about playing high notes, what are you thinking about doing?
I think about the direction of my air,
Okay, and which way do you typically think about?
flowing downwards. Sometimes for me it works better to flow up.
Okay, then I want you to try that. I want you to go ahead and start at the beginning, and when you get to those high notes, I want you to think upward air. Okay, take a big breath.
So as you can see here, the student struggled a little bit. But one of the things that he struggled most with is tension. And tension in brass instruments, especially trumpet, is so important to solve. And it's something that if you can catch early, it's great, and that student will thank you forever. But I'll talk about that a little bit later, about attention, but that's something you want to make sure you're watching out for. And here's the final video. The student is in a modeling only a lesson model. And unfortunately, the video gets a little weird, only because there's so much sound coming in with the trumpets. But just listen to the different types of modeling, and listen to what I'm playing and what you think that I'm trying to get out of the phrase. So as you can see here, I'm trying to get him in an ascending line, the right articulation, make sure you're tonguing on the first and third eighth note. But I kind of want him to climb here, so I'm like da 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 da. And that's something that's a little bit tough to describe in words, and so it works well in the modeling aspect here. So here's our final evaluation. Here's after everyone's second and third lesson, what kind of scores did we come up with? And we can see here that our biggest improvement came in group 1, which was the blended learning. The next best, which was 2, which was our verbal only, and then the worst here is group 3, which is our modeling only. So here's our conclusion. Talking about which is the most effective, of course, blending was the best. Averaged about 7 increased points per student. We have to look here. Where did they improve the most? And it was in tone. So the student, they added 5 points in tone together, which is the biggest leap in any of the categories between that. The other thing is verbal instruction is the next most effective at about 4.5 points per student. However, that being said, I feel that verbal instruction could be even more effective than the number of give credit for because of how strong the student was. He came in as an 18, ended at a perfect 20, and could only ascend by 2 points. He only had 2 points of room to move, so he really couldn't extend any farther than he did, as opposed to the other student who improved by 7. So, who knows? And maybe a more even model, maybe verbal instruction is even more effective than it leads on here. And then, of course, modeling, least effective, 2.5 points. And, I thought about this. My hypothesis was a little wrong. Modeling was not as effective as verbal instruction. But I think from my reflections on teaching and this experiment in particular, the concrete nature of verbal instruction, how you can hear it and write it down and speak it and know every facet of the language, everything. The students can hang on to it a little bit better. They can improve faster because they understand what's being said, they can grasp it, they can comprehend it, they know exactly what you're saying. But with the modeling, they can hear what needs to happen, but they don't necessarily know what that requires. So with modeling, it's a little difficult to figure out how to get them to sound a certain way, but also what they need to do so. So the last step was a follow-up and a little debrief. So I had each student answered 3 questions regarding the lessons that they had received. They're pretty simple questions. And I also told them what the experiment was about. And then I told them what group they were in, and had them answer whether it was effective or not. So here is one of the follow-ups.
So Clint, was the teaching effective, and why or why not?
I feel like sometimes it was effective. Most of the things that were addressed were only addressed through modeling, which was good in some ways, but not so good whenever, instead of explaining why I couldn't hit the high notes, they just said, well, do it like me, and then they kind of did it, and then I couldn't really figure out how to do it. They just said, oh, that's what it sounds like.
Okay. Do you feel that you've improved at the trumpet?
A little bit. There were a couple things. I mean, I did a good job of trying to emulate the sounds he was making, but not always comfortable with it. I think my high notes somehow got better, if I'm not really sure how.
Okay. In this particular experiment, I chose to use 3 different teaching styles and implement them in different ways to see how effective they were. You were in the group where it was only modeling and very little verbal instruction. Do you feel that this type of learning is useful in a school setting?
Only no, but I think that with some other things, yes. Just, you can't explain how you want something to sound as well as you can do it, but you also can't explain how to do it just by listening to it.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much. So another follow-up question that I had, and this particular student was unable to stay for the follow-up and debrief. They had to leave. So I had them write it up. And this was the answer to the last question. Do you feel that this type of learning is useful to you? And they were in a blended learning setting. They said, modeling and verbal instruction in music education are both essentials in schools. The concepts are usually all very new to students, and they need to be demonstrated and reinforced. The combination of the two supplement and complement each other in a way that enhances learning for most students. So essentially they're saying having the modeling, having the instruction, working side by side allows to reinforce, learn, develop new concepts, develop new ideas, all those kind of things to make the player better. So you have to kind of have a combination of both. So here's just some things that I learned going through this process, being a part of it. I learned that every student is different. You know, some learners can do great by hearing a teacher explain something and then they can just do it. But others aren't so like that. I know for me that if you explain something to me 15 times, you know, I might get it, but if you play it for me once, you know, I'll have it. So you have to know your students. Teachers, know your students. Implement some of the things that I use. Have a pre-session quiz or a informal, you know, information sheet, whatever. If they don't know what type of learning they are, ask them if they like to study with music. Ask them if they'd rather read a book or listen to a lecture from a teacher. You know, just find a way to learn about your students so that you can teach them effectively and efficiently, and that's going to make your programs better. One of the other things I learned is that teachers need to be able to explain things in more than one way. You know, I've been in situations where my teacher will say something and maybe I can't get it the first time. And so instead of trying something different, they say, oh, you know what, try it again. Well, maybe I don't get it again. Well, try it again. Or, well, keep practicing that or something. You have to have multiple ways to teach the same thing in case it doesn't work for your students. You know, it might work for someone, but you gotta try again, and something different, and something different, and something different, until they can latch onto that concept. And you never know what's gonna work. Maybe you have to have them stand on their head and whistle Dixie, and then they can play the part. But, you know, you have to figure out what they need to do to get that success. One of the other things I learned, and the last thing we'll talk about, and not necessarily with the learning modalities, but just in general as a teacher in trumpet, is that these young, experienced players, they're very, very tense. They want to play higher notes. They want to push. They are going to do everything they can to get those high notes. But the problem is you have to get them to relax. And sometimes that can be difficult. So here's a little video I put together of an exercise that I like to do to help work with students to release that tension. So you've got a student who's playing with a lot of tension. You've tried to have them relax. You've tried to lower their shoulders, keep their neck nice and loose, but they just can't get it. Every time they play, they look like this. It's not working. Here's something that I've tried that's worked for me and with my students. So you take all of your energy, starting with your hands, tighten it up. So you tighten up your hands. And you tighten up your elbows and your shoulders until everything is totally tight. And then you just relax all that energy. And you feel what it really means to be completely relaxed, nice and free. And then you just take a nice, easy breath. And you're good to go. So that's something that you can try. So what's next with this? What are the things that I can do to continue to grow this? So I'd like to get a larger sample size, you know, have more students and actually work with real students in the schools. Not college students pretending to play trumpet, you know. They're all instrumentalists, so they already know a lot about music. But getting actual students that maybe don't know trumpet so well and seeing what works for them.
I'd also like to do a larger term experiment. Add more variables, maybe add more students for sure. Maybe get different teachers. See if the way that you say something or how you say something or just who you are can change what students need. And definitely longer lessons and over a longer period of time. I'd maybe like to see lessons once a week for maybe an hour, 3 months. For 3 months, really being able to see that growth and see what sticks and what hasn't over the long period of time, which of course is the most important thing. Something else I'd maybe like to look at is maybe writing a paper or a dissertation on my findings and publish it. See if I can get more interest in these learning modalities and what works and what doesn't and what works for what students. And finally, something I'd like to do just in general is learn more about instrumental teaching strategies and use them on my own in my own lessons. You can always learn more. There's always another thing, and I think that learning about this kind of thing will help my teaching in general. So thanks for watching. You can always contact me if you have any questions or anything. And I'd love to have someone go out there and say, hey, these are the things that I tried that you did and they worked, or here's the things that I did and they didn't work, or here's what I found, or here's how something that we can expand this idea. I'd love to continue using this as a good resource for teachers to learn about what kinds of things work for students and continue to move our educational path forward.